Welcome to the first Social Developers Network podcast. I'm your host, David Salomon. As a documentary filmmaker, I'm intrigued by people's stories, who they are, and how they came to be who they are, especially in the area of personal and social development. How do we become the best version of ourselves and live our lives intentionally and for our communities? Our guest today is Joan McCarthy. Now in her mid-80s, she's very active with grandchildren and community organisations, as you'll find out. But let's go back to where her journey with SDN began.
I was working in the Prime Minister's Department when Gough Whitlam was Prime Minister as a catalyst. So it was a very small leap for me to join the Social Developers Network in Armidale at my first workshop up there. And that was really great because it meant that I could be with people who were sort of on the same page and supportive. The 70s was a very, very exciting time in terms of community development and social development and all of those sorts of things.
So Joan, what was it that sparked your interest in community development?
I decided to study psychiatric nursing because I could do that for free. I couldn't go to university at that time. It would have cost money and I didn't have that. I was rearing a family of 4 children and I could do psychiatric nursing and study and get paid at the same time. And so while I was doing that, one of our lecturers was talking about health education, and that really lit my fire and still does to this day, the idea of health education. And I went on and became a health educator for 20 years. But before I did that, just as I was finishing my training as a psychiatric nurse, the Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, developed this program called the Catalyst Program. And that very neatly matched in with health education and the whole concept of health education.
So Joan, how did all this new learning change the way you saw yourself?
It was at that time that I discovered that I actually had a brain. Up until then I was told it was a pity that Joan was so dumb and I'd failed at school and so forth. But when I went and did psychiatric nursing, I actually topped the hospital. I came 5th in the state actually. And I thought, my goodness, I think I've got a brain and more importantly, I really enjoyed using it. I just loved the study.
So you really started to find a direction in your life that hadn't been there before.
This idea of learning about a new way of being in community fitted in with all of those things that were being ignited in my life at that time. So I went off to Cessnock and I set up services for children in Cessnock as a catalyst. And that was on a contract for a year. But then the political coup occurred and Fraser took over and all of that stuff, all of the community development just got shoved into a box and packed away. However, the government might have done that, but the community had been lit, if you like, and part of that fire was burning away in Armidale when Ned Easton and John, when they got together up at Armidale University and ran their workshops up there, which were just fabulous. They were full of laughter and full of fun and full of deep and meaningful conversations and arguments, and I think it's always good to have a good argument, not a fight, but a good discussion, you might say. And we always managed to prepare our own food, so that also provided a way for us to enjoy each other's company and stimulate each other and support each other. This whole concept of social development and community development and a catalyst, they're all folding one into the other. And we had community health centres and legal health centres that were based on community development. It was such an exciting time.
So the incoming government had quite different priorities. but the country was already on a different trajectory. How did that start to play out?
The next thing that we planned was a trip to China, because we felt that China had some understanding of community development that we could learn from. When we got there, we discovered that the whole culture, the whole Chinese culture, was so different to the culture in Australia that we sort of put that idea to one side and just then spent our time. It was a study tour for 2 weeks, and we just spent our time learning about how it was rather than how we thought it might connect back in Australia, because it really didn't connect all that much. However, what it did do was broaden our thinking and expand our ideas of how things can be in the world. And so the trip to China, for me anyway, was absolutely mind-blowing. It was the first time I'd been out of Australia. My husband didn't want me to go, and I didn't have any money. How was I going to go? So I went to the bank to try and borrow some money, and I was told, yes, I could borrow some money, but I'd have to have my husband signed for it. I said, well, that's not right. And at the time, the anti-discrimination board was set up. And I said, well, I'll be taking this to the anti-discrimination. And they said, yes, well, they'll give me the money, because it wasn't fair that my husband should have to sign for something that he didn't agree with. People didn't want me to go because they thought China was a dangerous place to go to because it was communist.
In those days, we simply didn't have any idea about China. What sort of preparation did you have?
We met for 3 days in Sydney, the SDN. We found a conference centre down at Lane Cove, and we met there for 3 days because we had to get to know each other. We were something like, 23 people or something from all over Australia, and we came together to get to know each other and to sort out who would do what and why and how it was all going to work. And it worked very well. We had a leader. Once we got into China, that worked very well. However, he was finding it an enormous load to handle all of the issues that were coming up with a study group. And we said to him, well, if you fell off your perch, we'd still keep going and we'd sort ourselves out. There must be another way. And there was. And so we elected a whole lot of different leaders for different aspects of the tour. For instance, one person was organising our luggage. Another person would organise whether we wanted Chinese or Western food. Another person would organise who was going to be the speaker at the next place that we went to, whether it was a school or a law court or a hospital or wherever. And immediately took the pressure off this leader. And we discovered that we could manage very well with multiple leaders. And that's part of social development, community development, or catalyst, whatever you want to call it now, is recognising that we all have the capacity for leadership because we all have our own particular skills. And we were able to tap into that on that tour. And I just think that it was a wonderful time. Somehow these things seem to get buried and lost a little bit. I've been talking to people now about what would happen if we had a study tour again and maybe went to Uluru or somewhere a little bit more accessible. We learned so much, not just about leadership, but about all sorts of things. There were lots and lots of things that we learned about each other, about ourselves, and about how societies can operate so differently to ours and yet be so incredibly successful as China was and is. It's an extraordinary country, in my opinion.
Looking back now, Joan, what impact has your personal life had on your professional life and vice versa?
I've been thinking about a lot of these sorts of things over the last 6 months, and it seems to me that I have the capacity to compartmentalise my life. So my children are certainly a priority. However, having children means also letting them go and watching them step out on their own. And that leaves me sitting twiddling my thumbs. Community's about connection. And so with your family, that's about connection. I'm the eldest of 7 children, so I come from a big family and I have a big family. I'm very aware of connection. However, in recent years, this concept of connection has taken on a much broader concept for me. All of the creatures that make up this planet, it's about that kind of connectivity. But in terms of how this affects me personally and my personal life, to answer that part of the question, it's really vital because the SDN has been crucial in helping me to discover my confidence, to discover my self-esteem. And we've had lots of arguments about that because women, as you know, have struggled with this very badly. And the SDN was no different because all of the factions in community are alive in me and in everybody and in the group. And so they all come up and all of those things rub against each other so that we can either create fiction and have a fire and burn ourselves out, or we can create a bit of warmth and start to develop the positive, what we might see as the positive things, and grow from it. I believe that I have grown enormously from it. My confidence and self-esteem has grown enormously because of a whole lot of things. And it seems to me that community, I have spoken with people in the last few weeks about being a catalyst and community development. And because I'm now on a committee, a volunteer on a committee to be a patient advocate through the health department. And we talked about community development, and what comes back to me now is a very bureaucratised view of it. Community development is something where the people are led by an agency or a department or a government or a group or something like that. Whereas social development is more about exploring myself and each other and this connectivity so that we develop this initiative to take action just on our own initiative, not because some other organisation has organised it.
As you may have gathered, SDN organises a series of workshops throughout the year. One of these workshops will be taking place in September at the Riverdale Spiritual Centre near Gawler, north of Adelaide. Now, describing an SDN workshop can be challenging because it centres around the active participation of attendees, emphasising learning from lived experiences. And while the workshops don't primarily focus on delivering new information, participants often gain valuable insights and learnings from the shared experiences. Registrations for the workshop open on August the 1st, and I'll provide more information at the end of the show, and you can also find it in the show notes. But for now, let's return to my conversation with Joan, where she shares her experiences as a community catalyst and advocate, along with the valuable insights she's gained from living and working with the Pintabee people in the Northern Territory. Joan, you have a rich experience that you've gained over, your long and varied career. How do you think we can pass that on to younger people who are just beginning theirs?
I'm able to do talks and workshops for people 50 and over, and I wonder, where are the people, say, 20 or younger to 50? Where's that group? And I've been asking around about that, and I'm told, well, they're on social media. And the young parents are too busy to be involved with groups and clubs and things like that, like View or Probus or clubs like that. And so they've got all their groups online. And I think that I'm way, way behind communicating because of my inability to understand social media. And so I'm learning gradually learning about social media. Will I be fast enough to catch up? However, it's a two-way street, isn't it? And so when and if I can communicate with the younger generations, then we've got a bit of a channel happening here where we can teach each other, because the social media is crucial, is important and exciting and fun. And there is also another way. I was talking with my great-granddaughter, she's 7. I was staying with her over in New Zealand, and she went off to school and I stayed home. She came home, she said, "So what did you do today?" And I said, "Oh, I was talking to the chooks." And she said, "Huh? How long did you talk for?" And I said, "Oh, about 10 minutes. We had a lovely chat. I love talking to the chooks." And she found it very difficult to understand how you could talk to the chooks. Now, I talked with another 7-year-old, and I said, "Oh, I'm talking with the dragon, the eastern water dragon." She said, "Don't be silly. Dragons don't talk." And I said, "I think they do, but we don't understand their language." Oh, so there's that kind of thing where we tend to be teaching the younger generations that this is how the world is. And that is a very, very limited view of how the world is, because I need to learn that it is possible to talk to chooks or a dragon or a bird or whatever creature it is. And what's that got to do with community development? Well, I think what it does is it expands my thinking, so that when I see somebody who communicates in a different way to me, they may be deaf, they may have trouble actually with language in some way or another. Ways than one. Zooming, for instance, is becoming very, very popular. But I think we run the risk of forgetting that Zooming deprives us of an enormous range of communication skills. For instance, when you're communicating face-to-face with somebody, I'm getting many, many more signals, body language signals. And most of my communication is through those non-verbal signals, the expressions of the face. And I would like to see us recapture them. And I think the younger generations and the older generations can come together and share a whole lot of information so that we've broadened our capacity to be in the world.
Joan, we've known each other for quite some time, and perhaps one of the biggest things that changed my view of the world, really, I discovered that Australia wasn't the place that I thought it was, and that happened when I visited you out in Central Australia. Can you tell us about that?
In order to talk about my time in Kintore, it's probably helpful to mention that I also set up services for disabled children in Central Australia, based in Alice Springs. And when I was employed, it was thought that they'd be white children, but when I got there, I discovered that they were Aboriginal children. And so I faced the racism that was very, very strong, and still is probably. However, we managed to get through all of that, and the clubs and organisations that donated money were able to free themselves up enough to donate the money. And then sometime later, some years later, I went back and I transitioned the health clinic in Santa Teresa from the Catholic Church to an independent clinic. And as a result of that, I was headhunted to administer the health clinic at Kintore.
So for our listeners, Kintore is a small outstation about 250 kilometres northwest as the crow flies from Alice Springs. So tell us more about that story.
Now, the Pintabee people at Kintore, as I understand it, are amongst the most recently contacted Indigenous people in the world. So I think it makes them very special because They are the closest people to their culture, to their original culture. While I was there, it's quite sad actually. I find it quite sad that the government took language out of the schools and everybody had to speak English. And I found that totally and utterly devastating, because we know the World Health Organization, the United Nations, everything will tell you that if you learn your first language well, every other language after that is a lot easier to learn. So I saw it as a direct attack on the Aboriginal people. I was responsible for employing the hiring and firing of doctors and nurses, and we had 2 wonderful nurses there. If you're going to run a health clinic, all you need are some good bush nurses, because they're absolutely fabulous if you get a good bush nurse. The doctors, on the other hand, were thought to be absolutely necessary, and they cost a huge amount of money and showed no change to the health status of the population at all. The bush nurses changed the health status positively very quickly and were very good at doing that. And what they did, these nurses did, was they went out with the people and harvested bush medicine, and we set up a bush medicine pharmacy. And then we employed another doctor who couldn't stand the idea of introducing bush medicine because it was all a lot of nonsense. And so she was there only for the money, and she demanded an extra pay increase. And so even though all the evidence showed that it was making no change to the health status, the person that made the most change to the health status was the sport and rec person. Once you got a sport and rec person in at a fraction of the cost, the health status of the people went through the roof. They instantly became much healthier and stronger. But a doctor was there and just to give them Panadol and coughing medicine, but they were a doctor and somehow had been brainwashed into believing that that was what was going to make the difference to their lives. So I was removed from the community, and somebody said to me, "You must have been a good one because they only sack the good ones." And so I was sacked. But I took them to court and I got a wrongful dismissal benefit. But it left me with a huge depression because I felt like I'd let down all the Aboriginal people in the world, actually, that I hadn't stood up for them. It was an enormously difficult time, David, because I was a single woman living out there, and the status of women, as we know, was very low. And so the support was very difficult. And so it was a very difficult time. It was also a very exciting time. I learned a lot. And so I've come away believing that until we're able to really consider how we're going to learn from the Aboriginal culture, we're not going to get anywhere at all. While we're only thinking about what we have to offer them, then we're not going to get very far at all. We have to start to understand that the Aboriginal culture in Australia has so much to offer and teach us about how to operate together, how to do community development, if you like. And so that's always my default position. What would the Pintabee people be doing in this situation? And I find that very helpful to think like that.
I'd like to move on now, Joan, to talk about some of the things that are occupying you now, particularly in the way you advocate for older people.
I can give you an example of that in my own life right now, because on Friday I went for a driving test. At 85, I have to start having a driving test every 2 years now. To find that information was incredibly difficult because the department sent me vague information. I didn't get the information that I needed, and then to search it out, I got a whole lot of misinformation. The people over 85 have been ignored, and the department has made decisions about what they would need. And I'm now in the process of seeing what I can do to encourage the department to talk to the over 85-year-olds and ask them what do they need when they go for their driver's test. So what I'm saying is that, again, we have taken a section of the community and made decisions for them without actually consulting with them very well. So, and if we do it with ourselves, just imagine how more grotesquely we do it with different cultures.
So, Joan, there's an SDN workshop coming up in Adelaide in a few weeks. Can you tell us what it's like being at a workshop like this?
I'm looking forward very much to the workshop in Adelaide because I've got all sorts of ideas that I want to bounce around. And this is a forum where I can go, feel safe. That doesn't mean I don't get upset, angry or distressed or anything like that. I do. And then from that, I learn all sorts of things from that. And so I've got topics that I can share with that group when it comes up in Adelaide in September that I'm unable to share in any other group in any other way. It's quite unique and it's quite valuable, even though I may disagree with some processes and some ideas and so forth. The disagreeing isn't necessarily a bad thing because I go away and have a think about it. And I think, yeah, well, I still can see why I would hold my view. Or I would go away and think, well, I can see how I can now modify my view, which is really important. Or I can go away and think, oh, I need to scrap that idea. That idea is much better. I can build on that much better. And the other thing is that it provides networking, and it's the Social Developers Network. And networking is absolutely crucial. And I'm seeing that dying a little bit, I think, in our world, in Australia, where we're tending to form our groups. And the groups are fine, and it's the networking that's crucial.
So a big thanks to Joan for being part of our show. Your dedication and involvement with SDN for over 50 years have been truly remarkable, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the SDN workshop in September. Now, for more information about the Riverdale workshop, you can visit SDN website at sdn.ned.org.au. That's sdn.ned.org.au, where you'll find relevant links for registration and further details. Now, next week on the Social Developers Network podcast, I'll be talking to Mark Spain. He has an intriguing story about his early Outward Bound experience and how that put him on the path to leadership training, and particularly how rock climbing taught him about cooperation and collaboration. It serves as an excellent metaphor for working together in community. If you want to hear more about Mark's story, hit the subscribe button in your app. So, thanks again. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes and valuable insights in community and social development. And thanks for joining us on this inaugural episode of Social Developers Podcast.